In this demonstration, I'm going to show you how I describe volume of objects by drawing one of the seashells that I have. Besides understanding the formula for the distribution of light, you also create an illusion of volume in an object with a directional stroke that either follows the form or goes against it. Without it, your subject will stay flat. Let's look at some examples to observe the curvature of objects and how you can apply this information to describe any form in directional strokes. In the image of the flower consists of a large circle with several more smaller circles inside it. When you sketch out objects like this one, you draw the circles first and then place directional lines for every petal inside it. It's much easier to draw out the petals one by one, following the directional line of every petal. When you begin shading, you also follow the form to shade in the direction or curvature of every petal. The cat is a complex shape. It consists of several shapes, such as this one, this one, this one, and that one. And each of the shapes can be described differently with your shading and directional stroke. For instance, this shape could be described as shading this way. This shape could be described as shading this way. This elongated shape could be described with your strokes going in this direction. And this oval shape could be described yet with another directional stroke. Now you can discover your own ways of describing the form. Just remember to break down a very complex shape into smaller shapes and describe them differently. If I take this ear, I would shade the black part going this way, and I would shade the golden part going that way. The idea is to break down a complex shape into smaller shapes and find the directional stroke for every part of your object. We can look at another seashell over here and think about the pencil stroke and direction that we could use here. For instance, once again, you break it down to simpler shapes, which is, I can see one big shape over here. It's a triangle. There is another shape over here, and there is a third shape, which is another triangle. And I'm going to shade every shape differently to describe volume. For this shape, I would be using shorter strokes to describe volume going in different directions, because I'm thinking of volume and how it rotates in space. It goes out, curves, and goes in. I would start shading this way, then I would change my pencil direction going this way, and then I would change my pencil direction once again going that way. If we look at this shape, there are many ways how you can approach shading it, but I would make it different from this and that. I would start shading like this, then I would change pencil direction and I would shade like this. And I would change pencil direction and I would shade like that. Once again, look at the overall direction or the position of your object in space. For instance, in this case, the directional line would go like this. So whenever you start drawing, you place the directional line, and then you start mapping out the basic shapes going around that directional line. That's how you place your object correctly in space. The donut is also a circle with a curving subsections that form a unique pattern. Here you see black directional lines that illustrate a possible direction for shading every section of the donut. When you begin shading, you use short strokes in one direction, then change pencil direction in accordance with the change in the pattern. The idea is not to shade in long, aimless strokes that flatten out the form, but to focus on seeing these directional strokes and seeing the changes in every object you draw. Here we can look at the structure of the shell to sketch it out correctly. The shell is broken down into three major planes. The first plane is the oval. The second plane is the triangle, and the third is the connecting shape in the middle of the shell. Why is it important? When you layer and blend colors, you follow the contours and textures of the shell. You follow the form. By varying pencil direction and stroke length, you learn to draw subjects in 3 dimensions. You can follow the form with your shading, or you can go against the form with your shading. Follow, go against. Follow, go against the form. Follow, go against. Here you can also create volume by using shorter strokes and going inside and out. There is a difference between harder and softer pencils. For instance, this pencil is a little bit harder, so it keeps the pencil point a lot longer, as opposed to this one, which is softer. It is brighter, but at the same time it doesn't keep the edge as sharp as the harder one. You can use it to your advantage. Whenever you work on your drawing, you can use softer colored pencils, drawing out the background, which is a lot faster, and you can cover up larger areas using your soft pencils. But whenever you get to the areas where you want to define the edge, you switch to your harder pencil and basically draw out the edge like so, and then shade right next to it. Here I also want to talk about the pencil strokes and how they define volume. Most of the forms can be created via cross-hatching because it smooths out the surface, and if your cross-hatching is very tight, you don't really need to blend colored pencils. In this example, we can see circular strokes. These come in very handy when you draw around the highlights, or you shade a very small area that shouldn't have linear strokes. You can see that this one looks much nicer than this one because I used lighter pencil pressure on this one. In this example, you can see definite strokes. Sometimes they're useful to describe the edges and make them much stronger than general shading. This type of stroke is called stippling, and sometimes you can create textures with this kind of stroke. Edges play a crucial role in drawing. Some must be very definite and descriptive, and other lines must stay soft, such as this one. Usually in drawing you want to have lines that appear and disappear. So if you look at the outline of the face, you'll see that the line disappears, reappears, and disappears again. And it applies to any type of drawing. If you look at this image, you'll see that some lines have a much harder edge and other lines have a much softer edge. In this example, you can see harder edges going around here, and there are much softer edges on her nose, in the skin. Usually harder edges describe details, and you can see blurred edges where colors are similar in value. In this demonstration, I'm going to use polycolor pencils and some Prismacolor Premier pencils, Kohinoor colored pencil paper, kneaded eraser, and a Sakura touch pen. Because Kohinoor polycolor pencils don't have the names but have the numbers, that's why I would suggest referring to the color chart in your reference to see the actual colors that I'm using. You can also begin thinking how you can achieve similar results using the colored pencils available in your box. In this reference photo, we can see that the light divides the shell into two parts. The top part of the shell receives lots of light. The bottom part of the shell is in the shadow, which is important to note once you begin picking colors and shading it. It needs to be darker and grayer consistently. You'll see me simplifying the pattern on the seashell. I use a very light green for outlines instead of a graphite pencil to minimize grease. Then I block in a single warm green. I simplify the object by focusing on major patterns I see in the seashell. Instead of trying to copy every dot, I focus on the general breakdown and curvature of the shell. This curvature determines the direction of my shading. I add dark brown into the darkest spots with Kohinoor 33, which is similar to dark brown. And I also use Prismacolor Black Raspberry. I shade the shell's interior inside the oval using one color only, altering my pencil pressure to record shifts in tone. Remember not to shade up and down or straight across. I observe its concave shape and copy it with my strokes, rotating my pencil and paper as I move across the interior of the seashell. This drawing helps you understand how you can adjust your pencil pressure to rotate and curve your strokes in accordance with the object's form. The strokes must be descriptive of your object's form, and by adjusting your pencil pressure, you can create different tones and rotate the object in space. I shade a white stripe in the middle of the shell with Kohinoor 29. I make sure to curve it around the shell. I map out the green lines. Cast shadow gives a physical presence to any object. I always incorporate it into my still life. In my next step, the goal is to make this edge softer than the shell itself. This part that is close to the shell is going to be the darkest, and as we move away from the shell, it gets lighter. I use medium pencil pressure shading the cast shadow, allowing some paper to show through. I work on the color of the cast shadow now. while it's not final, I can bring it to a high degree of finishing in this step. I use number 57 and 29, which is light blue and light ochre. The sharper my pencils, the smoother my shading is going to be on this paper, which is a beautiful paper to use for colored pencil drawing. At this point, I step back to check the shape of the shell and its rotation, and I also look at the cast shadow to see if it's dark enough in comparison to the seashell. You need to rotate your pencil this way, and when you switch to the outer shell, you need to rotate going this way, and you will be coloring going this way and filling in all the greens that you see. Because the light comes from above, you see one half of the shell being lit by the light, and it's a very strong light. When we get to the terminator, or the area where the object turns into the shadow, we get a very dark area. So this part of the shell is going to be a lot darker. That means that you're going to pick darker pencils to depict the darkness and the color of the shell. And when you're here, you're picking up lighter pencils to depict the light. Obviously, you're going to have a few highlights in this part of the shell because it receives the light coming from above. I work on the interior of the seashell again, layering more color this time. I shade with Prismacolor yellowed orange or Kohinoor number 42 and a touch of Prismacolor yellow chartreuse or Kohinoor number 62. If your color appears too strong, what you can do, you can take your kneaded eraser and tap the color, the lines, whatever you have in here, to lift out the pigment. Remember, colored pencil doesn't erase completely, but if you need a more modest lift out, you can do it. I'm also seeing some warm lime green inside this area, therefore I'm going to use a little bit of green over my previously applied colors, and that will make it more colorful. I see some green over here as well. Usually red is the complement of green. As you can see, I've changed my direction and I actually go across it because it also moves that way, and this color is so light that my strokes remain unseen, but they help me blend the previously applied colors. There are subtle shifts in color, therefore I'm going to use this light green colored pencil and recreate those shifts in color. I finish up working on the shell's interior by drawing around the rim to leave some paper white, where I see a few highlights along the left edge. You can also use Prismacolor Peach and Beige for the lightest tones present near the rim. Remember, it's always about creating softer and smoother transitions. I begin developing the green stripes in the middle of the shell and watch for shifts in color and temperature between warm and cool greens. This is a place where we can see a clear division of light and dark. This side is going to be our light and this side is going to be a lot darker. To start from the darkest area over here, and then just keep moving up, paying attention to the light and color temperature. I'm using two colors like warm green and cool green. In this part of the shell I'm seeing light cool green, but this part of the shell is going to have warmer yellowish green. If it's difficult for you to separate between the colors, it's difficult for you to see the color temperature, just ask yourself if your color looks bluish or yellowish. If it leans towards the yellow, then it means that it's a warm color. But if it leans towards the blue, like the one I'm using right now, it's a cooler color. And then you can also look at the lightness or darkness of a color. This one is a quite dark cool green, but I can find another color in the box that is going to be lighter but stay on the cool side, let's say like this one. Once again, don't forget to overlap your colors. I have a little bit of gray applied over here as a placeholder, but I'm going to use more green in here as well as darker gray and even a little bit of yellow ochre like this one to make this gray very colorful. And I do see these colors in the shell, so it's not like I'm making them up. I guess I've trained myself to see those colors. That's why I'm asking you not to paint by numbers, but focus on the value and color temperature of each color you use. And then eventually it will be easier for you to figure out what colors to use in a specific area. Otherwise, when I tell you to use a particular color, you use it, but you don't think much about it, you just shade with it. But once you start thinking how light or how dark you need to go and analyze the color temperature, it's gonna get easier after a while to see that. There is no white in this strip of gray, only a few lighter reflections. So right now I'm just filling this in because this is my turning point where I see the breakup between the light and the shade. I've rotated my paper sideways and that makes it easier for me to shade in the direction I want to shade in. If I see teeny tiny highlights, I let them go because I know I can come back and put them in with the Sakura touch pen. But if I see a bigger highlight or a large space that has white in it, I make sure I leave that area white and never color it. If I color it even with white colored pencil, I lose the luminosity, and that leads to the loss of transparency and the illusion that you want to create. What I'm doing, I'm kind of following the curvature and defining these lines a little bit more, and then I'm gonna start shading in between those lines and just paying attention to slight changes in color temperature or a change in the pattern itself. Because I'm using harder pencils and paper that has almost no texture, you can see that I fill it in, and I basically don't even need to blend the colors. They blend on their own. It happens because the paper has a very limited texture, and when you use harder pencils, they keep the point for a long time, and it's just a lot easier to fill in. That's why you don't see me blending in this demonstration. Okay, the colors on this edge need to stay super light. It needs to disappear into the side of the paper. You do need to have color on the edge though. If you don't, the shell is not going to turn all the way. When you make these lines, make sure that they rotate and they don't look flat or too straight, because if you make this line straight, it's going to flatten out the shape. You curve these lines in accordance with the shape of the object. I rotate the paper so it becomes a lot easier to shade and curve my lines, and that's what I'm suggesting for you to do here. When you're done mapping out the darkest curves, you just start shading around them, following the light and dark that you see. And once again, this side of the shell is going to be a lot darker than the top part of the shell. Therefore, even the light and white parts of the shell need to be colored slightly. I add a little bit of blue into my general grayish color that I see in the shell. I'm also adding fractions of other colors into the grays. As the shell is reflective and it reflects lots of color that's around the object. The seashell has a major division of light and shade right in the middle. That's why I focus on the bottom part of the shell in this step, which is darker than the top. I use this information to pick the colors in accordance with values, not color alone. And actually, you can apply the same colors you want to use in the light, but shade with heavier pencil pressure to darken the values at the bottom. So essentially, you could use the same colors, but you use heavier pencil pressure to make them darker at the bottom. You follow the form or its curvature and don't make the lines too straight and long. The idea is to create volume with a soft shading that curves around the shell. Because of the combination of colored pencil paper and harder pencils used in this project, extra blending is not needed. Harder colored pencils such as Kohinoor brand tend to blend on their own when used on this colored pencil paper. If you use different supplies and see the texture building up at the moment, blend your strokes with the colorless blender at this step. I'm now working on the top part of the seashell, shading with the same colored pencils but lighter pressure. I'm going to fill in the general tones that I see over here, which are warmer, lighter greens. And then I'm going to develop stripes of cooler greens going this way. And at the same time, I'm gonna keep track of the lines that I see in here. As I'm looking at the picture, I'm analyzing the light, and I'm seeing that the highlight is going to be here. That means that everything else around that highlight needs to be a little bit darker, even if it's white. Because nothing is white here, I'm giving a light coat of yellow to this side of the shell. And then I'm going to build more color on top of that. You can see me rotate my paper to apply soft strokes following the curves of the form. I identify the patterns of color between the curves and fill them in. I also pay attention to the edges so they stay rather soft between these patterns of color. I don't outline them. I overlap the colors to create seamless transitions between the hues. I'm noticing that the cast shadow doesn't look even, and that's why I make a decision to apply a Prismacolor 30% warm gray across the entire shadow to connect and blend all the colors that I have already applied. That's why the shadow remains very colorful, but it also becomes gray. Pay attention to the outer edge of the cast shadow so that the line is not sharp or heavily outlined. The cast shadow under the shell can be shaded in many ways. However, smooth horizontal directional strokes always work well to separate it from the subject itself. The paper surface becomes too waxy after considerable layering and blending, and as a result, it doesn't accept any more pigment. To overcome this challenge, I usually spray my drawing outside using a little bit of final fixative. I let it dry completely, and now the surface is ready to accept a little bit more pigment. When you get close to the finish line, step back and evaluate the contrast, which is values, and pay attention to your edges. The shell should have shifts in tone to rotate in space, but most importantly, it should imitate the curvature pattern we see in it. The edges should be sharper around the rim and much softer in the contour line of the shell and the cast shadow. I shade with a very heavy pencil pressure in Prismacolor White to blend the lightest green tones in the light. Finally, I use Sakura Pen Touch to make teeny tiny highlights, and I clean up the smudges around the shell with a kneaded eraser. If you look at your drawing and you see that it doesn't quite look right, first thing to check is your uneven shading. You shouldn't have any gaps. It should be nice and even. Second, pay attention if you actually left the paper white for the highlights. Most of the time students color their highlights and it kills the luminosity that you need. Eliminate the graphite lines and erase your smudges. I apply the final fixative outside. Always remember to create volume with different pencil pressure, create volume with color gradation and overlapping, create volume with different strokes, and create volume by always shading on a hard surface, which means placing your paper on a hard surface to have easy layering.